Hello again, everybody. Anybody who's listening. I've come back today for chapter 4. And yeah, we're just going to jump right into it. Chapter 4 is entitled The Leadership. It was clear to all they were not to continue along the African coast as they swung too far north and went away from the sandy beaches. Harold had made it known that there would be a great raiding performed on the Italian island of Sicily. The place was all circland, in the hands of the circlander, and their arrival would mark more raids and warring on the Fatimids. This Byzantine Michael Emperor was using the Varangian to great effect against his enemy, enriching himself greatly in the process. All of the Varangian paid a tithe from their plunder to the emperor. They, of course, reported far less than they actually took, and only paid some of what they would otherwise owe. The emperor knew it was the way with these Northmen, but he would do nothing. His enemy paid in blood, while he was paid in silver. Nothing of this would need to change unless the money stopped. And for the part of the Varangian, they were more than happy to be the emperor's wineskins. They had the access to lands for raiding that were rich in plunder and exotic in all things. Have you ever been to Sicily? Asked Ragnar. I haven't, only heard tell. I, too, have not seen it, though if it is anything like the lands all around the sea, then I know what to expect. It had been 6 days since their last raid in Africa, and Fitzbjörn had been growing used to contributing to conversation. It was still strange for him, but he worked at the idea of a likeness of Huger. Have you seen it, Inga? No, I have not seen what has come of this last great raid. And so I grow excited for this Sicily. Much has it been already. They all nodded. I heard Harold's skulls, you know, Hafald said. Do you know what he is reporting the raid along the coast of the Circland? The others shook their head. He has called it a capturing of twice by 40 castles. Ragnar nearly choked on the water he was drinking. He no saying such a thing. That was never so many. They weren't even castles. Hafald put up his hands. It does not matter what you say of it. That is what will be spoken of when they talk of this raid. Harold the Clever, who took the enemy's strongholds all. Do you ken of what was the affair on the island with the camp place? Asked Ragnar. I know not exactly the details, but I heard it had something to do with stones. I know. I was there, Fitzbjorn said. They turned to him. They had grown, slowly, accustomed to his adding to story and conversation, as odd as it still was to hear. We came to a place that was good for camp, but there was one place that had a better seat because it was softer when it rained. There was only the room for one army to stay there the night, and the tall Gerger wanted the place. So they decided they were going to draw lots, and the winner would have the place for themselves, letting the gods decide. Gerger agreed and started to put his mark on his lot. When he was done, Harold asked to see it, and he showed him. Then Harold drew his own mark down, and they put the stones both into a sack. It was then Harold who drew a lot from the bag and started to celebrate. He claimed he'd drawn his own lot and that he therefore won the place. Then he threw the stone into the sea. All watched, not understanding his strangeness. Girger asked why he would throw away the lot without anyone being able to see it for themselves, and then Harold said that if they but looked into the bag, they would see the remaining stone had Girger's mark on it. He had to accept defeat, and we were allowed the better place to camp that night. So did he cheat? I think that is certain. But whatever you may say, we had the better place to sleep, Neil said with a smile. Still, he should not have done that. It was said the gods should decide. Harold is not a god. He should not have done so, Fitzbjorn said grimly. Do you think Geirger discovered what he did? Asked Bodil, or suspected but could not protest then and sound like a child. I think that is what it is. Perhaps that is why he left. That was a long time ago, Fitzbjorn said. Besides, his best warrior stayed with us. And Harold has taken much spoil since then, the red-haired Ragnar said. These Greek who stayed all chose with us Harold to lead even before Geirger went home to Miklagard. I think that is what made him leave. And what then shall we find in Sicily? Asked Bodil. She seemed to have noticed Fitbjorn's discomfort talking about Harold. She too didn't care for the man much. From what little I have heard, we are going to find oranges, Niels responded. What? What are they? Asked Ragnar. You are newer to this part of the world, Fitzbjorn began. They are fruits that are sweet. I had them from the Venice market at Miklagard once. They are good. I would have them at a feast, I think. We may need to wait, Halfald said, looking in the direction they were headed, his eyes wide. What? A feast? We aren't likely to have a feast on the sea, Niels said. Not just the feast, but our progress for Sicily. Look there. He pointed where they were heading, and they all saw 3 ships on the horizon coming toward them. The men on the prow of the ship were discussing among themselves. Those are Circlander corsairs, Inga said. Pirates. She looked to her sides. Where are their ships? There, Bodil said, pointing behind them. They all looked and saw that the leading longship, Harold's galley called the Red North, was farther ahead than any other in the fleet. That is why those ships are not fleeing at the sight of us. They see us as alone and will attack. See my conquest, Fitzbjorn muttered under his breath, his eyes closed. Look upon my battle glory and ready your great horn to drink at my victory. All to arm! Ready! We are under attack! Harold shouted from the step behind the dragon head. Everyone then scrambled to put on their armor, a frightening thing to do. Fighting without armor was incredibly dangerous for anyone, but to fall into the water with one's armor on was certain death. Niels, Ragnar, Inga, Bodil, and Hafald all started the work at putting on their chain shirts and helms, but Fitzbjorn continued to pray with his eyes closed. Those corsair ships would be on them soon, too soon. They wouldn't have time to armor fully. Let the Valkyrie roam this battle looking for my soul in vain. Let them rejoice that they need not take me home yet. Furiously will I fall among my enemy and pour blood from their grievous wounds. Take the sail down, slower advance, Harold called, and the still armoring Varangian worked to stow the great canvas of the sail, a laborious process that took many hands. If they could allow the Allies' ships behind time to catch up, they may stop the enemy attack before it started. But they were coming on fast. Ready oars! Harold called before the sail was fully taken down. Those still working at it continued while everyone else paused in their strapping and took up the oars and started to fit them to the oar port. Aesir Nornir Visa Vanir, Fitzbjorn continued to chant. He felt alive, truly and horribly alive. Turn to the right! Those on the left rowed with as much haste as they could muster, while they on the right tried to slow the ship. The effect was that there was a definite lurch to the right side. Harold was trying to maneuver the ship to one side so as to not allow themselves to be surrounded. He hoped also to slow the ship's advance. Turning back and fleeing wouldn't be an option, as the ship's turn took too long and was so wide they'd be caught in the progress. Attack was their better option now. Archers and shields! Prepare for the assault! The sail was finally stowed and the rest of the oars were in the water. Many were still rowing, but most stood ready and put their shields out to the sides as the corsair ships were moving to come at them from both sides. Most had done the minimum to armor themselves. The chain shirts and helms did the majority of the protection when it came to mortal wounds, but too many had not time enough to strap on plated sleeves to protect their forearms and felt naked without that piece of protection. Hold! Ready! Harold shouted as the ships approached. All who hold together the world tree Yggdrasil, Fitbjorn said. He opened his eyes and stood up, his axe held tight in his hands. He still wore no armor, though, and held no shield. His tunic was off of him as well. What are you doing, madman? Niels said, turning to see him. Put something on and protect yourself, at least a helmet. Fitbjorn's long black hair was braided down his back, his expression a pleased grin and hungered sneer at once. Remember that the gods are watching, he responded. It would be no great death to fall to Aeger's hall. I am bound for another feast. He rolled his shoulders and felt the bones cracking at the joints. Let them come to with their blades. Let us break their ship beneath them, he shouted. There then came an arrow from the ship that bore down on them from the right side. It was caught by a shield near the front, and returning shots were sent back. The other ship then glided along the side of the Varangian, and their oars were either pushed down or caught up with those of the corsairs and shattered with a great rending cracks. Both sides were yelling at the other in battle cries, and the Varangian blared battle horn. Arrows flew back and forth, but the corsairs had fewer shields to stop the archers' attack. Fitbjorn stood tall and had to duck behind the shields to avoid the coming arrows. He didn't want to make a standing target that the enemy would focus on, for even if he dodged the attack, the risk to those who faced the other way for the next ship was too great. The ships stopped against each other at the close distance, and corsairs were coming over with their swords held high. The first who tried the gap, yelling wildly, was speared through and fell screaming to the water. Others, however, managed to get across and slammed into the shields. Their momentum with the jump combined the unsure footing on the boat railing meant they managed to break through. The undoing of the shield wall was, of all things in battle, the greatest risk to the army. If the wall broke in the field, the battle was lost. However, the rules for an engagement between ships was different. Still, their training and understanding of warfare encouraged them to hold the wall at all need. Fitbjorn, not weighed down in armor, leapt skillfully to the right and hewed a corsair who landed behind the wall. With one stroke, he dropped the man to the deck, blood spilling freely. The goats were all screaming, as goats are wont to do. As with any battle, it was a noisy affair. The Aesir were sure to notice. He turned and saw a man leaning over the shields of Niels and Bodil, his presence enough to oppress their own attacks. Another corsair was about to join them in what was sure to be a successful crash through. Fitbjorn ran atop the seats and stabbed with the tip of his axe into the man's neck. The corsair's blood sprayed from his opened wound, covering those at shield, and fell from his dominant position. The man behind him swung and nearly struck Niels, but Fitbjorn's axe head stopped the blade just as it was about to take his life. The raider moved to get a better position to attack the man, but every time he tried to strike at him, the corsair ducked behind the shields and sprang up to resume attacking. Frustration built as he only wanted this man dead. He heard the horns behind him, and the sounds of battle started there, and knew that the other ship had come. This was not good. He stood taller and saw that the third ship was bearing down on the right side and would bolster the efforts of those men in front of him. He tried once more to strike the man, but he again ducked under the shields. Fitzbjorn shouted in his battle rage and charged forward like a muskox. The backs of the shields before him were forced apart by his rush. There was resistance from those holding the shields as well as the man who braced them on the other side. But the man was not at all ready for the force that pressed through him. The white bear roared as he sprang through the shields and knocked the man back. The corsair, utterly bewildered, was thrown and landed on the railing of his own ship. Fitzbjorn took one step off the edge of his long ship and with the momentum of his charge jumped the short gap to the other ship. His right foot planted on the corsair's chest, right over his heart, pressing his ribs to breaking against the wooden rail. The man tried to shout as the wind was forced from his body, but only blood came sputtering out. The corsair, standing on their ship and trying to swing at the Varangian, were stopped in their assault at the sheer violence of this wild-eyed berserker. He shouted a short grunt in his total energetic exertion and swung his axe in a sweep from right to left and slashed through the necks of two of the pirates. His axe, now all the way over to his left side, he stabbed out and struck another in the throat with the edge of the blade. Then he wrenched his whole body, his whole being to the other side and let go with his left hand. He reached his axe madly to the right and struck another pirate in the head. With the vast momentum of these movements, he found that he was falling back towards his ship. He stepped back, his right foot, and landed on the long ship's railing. The enemy sailors had gotten their wits restored and rallied to attack anew. "Cross!" he shouted. There was a moment of hesitation. "Bodil and Ragnar, jump over!" To lead the charge, he heaved off his right leg and swung his axe as he advanced. The swing was more to ward out a space to allow for more room once he landed, and it worked. He stood and faced the left, where there were more of the enemy sailors standing to fight. He lifted his axe before him, ready to attack, and then he heard the sound of a corsair yell behind him. Fitzbjorn didn't flinch or turn. If this was the day that the Norns had fated him to die, it meant that there would be a changing of kings this day. And then he heard Bodil's war shout and heard her short sword clang against a sword. Her momentum and shield then crashed the man to the ground. Fitzbjorn saw an archer take aim with his arrow knocked to his bow and released it. And Hafald's shield appeared in front of him. He held his axe easily and seemed completely devoted into the fight. The arrow thumped into the wood, and Ragnar, taking no time to acknowledge Fitzbjorn at all, swung his cross-hilted sword and fought to the left. The other Varangian was starting to pour over the ledge of the ship. There were twice as many Varangian as there were pirates, and once they worked to use their number, they quickly overwhelmed the ship. "Archers to the sides, ready to fend off the coming ship! Shields in front!" Another Varangian shouted, and they all rushed to take the order. Ragnar and Bodil were not the only of Fitzbjorn's friends to come across to this new side. Niels, Inga, and Hafald were with him too. None of them had bows, and so they waited in reserve. "Where the fuck is your armor?" asked Hafald. "He is right. You should have put your helmet on. And also your mail," Bodil said. What foolishness were you sickened with? How did you think you would defend yourself?" Niels said, his usual joviality replaced with furious concern. "This is my armor," Fitzbjorn responded. "No, this is to be... No, this had to be, laddie," Ragnar said, holding up his shield. "You have the blessing of God to not have died just now." But Fitzbjorn was not paying close attention to their berating. He looked across the long ship to where the other side were making their battle. "We should go and fight with them. Not without your fucking armor," Hafvald scolded, pushing him on the shoulder. "You have to put the Gandrison on, and the helmet. There isn't enough time." Fitzbjorn dashed past them and jumped to the longship, and there vaulted over the stowed mast and joined in the fight at the railings. The left side had yet to break their shield wall tactic, but were holding strong. He stayed in the reserve behind them and swung over their heads to attack the enemy pirates. One of the corsairs then jumped forward and ducked as he chopped for his neck. The man grabbed one of the Varangian and pulled him back. The movement was so unexpected that no one could react fast enough, and the man fell straight down toward the water. The others had to watch in horror as Heavily armored, he fell between the resting oars and splashed in the sea. Fitbjorn stood stunned for a moment, seeing the single empty space in the shield wall before him, but he summoned his awareness to full effect and dropped his axe to the deck. Then, without a thought, he dove forward, between the shields once more, though now he delved straight down. He slammed into the sinking Varangian as he slipped deeper into the water. He grabbed tight hold of the man's quilted gambeson with his right hand and flailed with his left, trying to find anything to grab onto. A pair of wooden oars brushed against the back of his hand, and he deftly turned his wrist and grabbed onto it. He tried then to lift the man, who was being pulled to the depths with great strength. The warrior's arms came up with a frantic desperation, trying to claw for purchase. He could see nothing, all about him being only the roil of the water and white bubbles of their crushing. Even now he felt his air running out. He could only imagine how long the panicking man would have. If they shoot arrows at us now, we're dead. Either of us hit would be enough. He strained to pull the man up, his immediate goal only to meet his hands, that the man might be pulled to a better position to pull himself free, to where the other Varangian could help with his rescue. Fitbjorn let go the oar to reach up higher on the haft, his hope being that if he but climbed thus, he'd eventually reach a position where he could more easily save this man. Even as he hurried his pull, he felt the man's flailing arms weakening. No, he thought as he kicked with all his strength. Numerous times he accidentally kicked the man, though it was never hard enough for him to stop. The man's grip returned, changed to simply clinging to Fitbjorn's arm then. No, you can't give up. I need your help. And then his hand emerged from the water and his head came out a moment later. He breathed in a huge breath and pulled against the burning strain he felt in his arm muscle. He managed to yell through the water, though it came out as a gargled sputter, meaning nothing. His plan then was to slide the man up along the slope of the oars and hope the others would just be able to grab him. But he felt the man's grip weakening more and more. If he could just get the man to grab an oar shaft. And then the corsair landed on him. He saw the red of the pirate's clothing instantly and knew what must have happened. Either the man had lost his footing or been pulled down. He would never have willingly jumped into this mess. The man had still his sword, and Fitbjorn knew he needed to take a breath. Without the ability to swing his blade, the man's only option was pressing to slice or stabbing. Either way, in their doomed wrestle, Fitbjorn needed to take control of the man's head. He grabbed his forearm, good enough for now, and turned around the oar with strenuous effort. In the action, his head went beneath the water's surface again, and he looked wildly. Then remembered the Varangian and looked down. He saw the vestige of a shadow slipping away to the deep. Even as he watched it, he was sure if it was the Varangian he'd been trying to save, or just a trick of the light. I am sorry, brother. With renewed fury and righteous vengeance empowering him, he pulled himself from the water with one arm gasping the oar. The other hand still held fast above the man's wrist, and he squeezed as hard as he could. The corsair could not let go where he held the oar lest he fall lower into the water, and was thus in a bad position, he knew. Fitbjorn could tell that the man knew he was in trouble. He dragged down on the man's wrist and forced him to sink under the water, his strength easily overpowering the smaller pirate. He lifted his right foot and stepped on the man's shoulder, then pushed him deeper while still holding his hand. The man's grip slipped from the wet wood of the oar and was pressed into the water. Drown in Helheim! Your blood shall sate the door dog! He lifted his foot and kicked at the man again and again. The man's flailing arm finally slowed and stopped its frantic pursuit of something to grab. Fitbjorn watched as the vibrant color of the man's cloth sank. He pulled himself up by the slanted oars and gripped the railing of the longship. He knew his back was exposed to the attack of the other ship and found places to step and rise onto the longship as fast as he could. When at last he was on the other side of the railing and among more Varangian, he searched for his axe with his eyes. His awareness was full only of the need to find his weapon and fight. He also had to get behind the shields, lest those arrows still be flying. A hand was put onto his shoulder, and he was pulled up. He looked right and saw the leg of the one who pulled him. If it was an enemy, he'd have to pull on the knee and throw him off balance, then protect against those around as they may be armed with bladed weapons. The leg wore the cloth breeches that were common among the Northmen. It was a friend. He turned onto his back and looked around, ready to meet the threat that might be around him, and found that the battle was done. Harold had won, of course. He breathed heavily for his exertions and closed his eyes. Hail! He heard that word spoken, and then it was said again. Hail, friend! Hail, warrior! He sighed deep and opened his eyes. The shield-bearing Varangian over him were standing in a circle and looking down at him. He raised himself to sitting on one of the seats. Who do you hail? He asked. You wore no armor in the face of our enemy. You plunged into the water without hesitating. That is why he wears no armor. He readied himself to save any who fell, and he risked himself for it. Hail! Fitbjorn shook his head. He knew his friends would not approve this overt praise of his actions. They all thought him a fool, no doubt. You leapt in to save Cedric. I barely counted a breath before you. You just jumped in. I didn't save anyone, Fitbjorn said to himself. And then to kill an enemy after that, after he jumped onto you in the water. That is certainly a worthy feat of a saga. I didn't save anyone, he said louder. I shall remember this story. I didn't save anyone, Fitbjorn said sternly, standing. The Varangian is dead. I could not save him. He sank to the sea depths. He was panting still as he said it, water streaming down his face and plastering strands of hair to his head. And he will be feasting with the Allfather before the night comes. But for the moment, said an older man leaning down to Fitbjorn's ear, I think he will be received in Aeder's great hall, no doubt. No doubt he is drinking of a mead kettle a mile deep. No? Gather everything together and make sure the oars are still in good order. We sail for the rest of the fleets before the rest of the fleet can reach us. Harold shouted from where he stood at the back, his sword stained red and gleaming in the sun. Have any of our wounded or dead readied for care and the journey and pull us away from these ships. Should not we search the ships for goods? Someone asked. Let the others do that. We make for the shore. We shall be the first to reach the Sicily. Ready the sail. Pull us from these anchors, and we shall make for the shore. The anger was upon him, the grand energetic fury that all battles rely on. His orders could not be argued against in that moment. The sailing Varangian all gathered together and worked to set the sail, keeping the 5 wounded and 2 dead in a safe place while they continued north. They also removed their heavy armor in the hot sun and drank greedily at skins of water. You survived, asked Niels, his anger still squarely in place. He took his helmet off, the sweat making his blonde hair stick to his head. That must be some impressive luck you have. I think it is. The gods have improved my luck, but I cannot extend it to any other. I could not save that man. One of the 2 dead there? Asked Bodil, as she shrugged out of her mail shirt. He looked up at her. She stretched broadly, wearing nothing but her breeches. Stop staring, Raider. There are 4 of ours dead this day. 1 dead to a saber slash at the back. 1 dead to a cut in his head. 1 wounded who will die from the loss of blood, with the wound over his liver. 1 sunk too low and was lost in the sea. The others all looked at Fitbjorn's darkness. His expression lugubrious and returned downcast at the decking. Bodil put her tunic on and tied a belt around her waist. One of the wounded will die, asked Ragnar. He too had removed his gambeson, but was in no rush to put anything onto his back. 2 of those dead. Already. Make a seat ready for him in the hall, while the 3rd drinks deeply of Aeder's great drinking pot. Inga put a hand on his shoulder. This is so. They are the more lucky now. Their fates are met, and they are living with the gods to prepare. We shall sing songs in honor of them. Push us away from these derelict ships. They went about using the oars to stab the other boat from them, and once free, fit the oars back to the oar ports. Pull! All the Varangians strained against their worn and burning muscles and pulled the longship away from the site of the battle. Their way was made for the distant shore. On to Sicily did they sail, battle still ringing in their minds. 2 days after their meeting with the pirate ships, they made landfall on the southern coast of the island of Sicily. The land was all still a mixture of Serkland and Christian control. There were Byzantine, Greek, Norman, Moorish, and Serklander, all living on the island. The ship was pushed onto the beach, and the Varangian leapt from the side to the sands, weapons and armors ready for a fight. The goats had been slaughtered the night before to bolster their strength if they so needed. The landing, however, was uncontested, even as they formed in battle preparation for the beach. Tentatively, Harold walked about the ranks and observed the trees. They would make his camp, but they could also hide an enemy force. The sight of the dragon prow upon the ship meant only one thing, and most of the Mediterranean knew it. Anyone along the banks of the rivers knew it. Hold these ranks until the remaining ships arrive. He looked back. Shouldn't be too long now. Once they're here, we'll send out foraging parties and make camp. Do we need to hold a shield wall until they're here? Asked a woman among the rank. Harold fixed her with a stare. No, we haven't been attacked yet. I think we can post guards to watch those trees carefully. We will not go into the forest until the rest arrive. You there, and you, and you. Watch the front and along the beaches. Everyone else start to unload. If we have indeed been fortunate to have this place to ourselves quiet, then tonight will be easy. But do not get complacent, any of you. Tomorrow will not be peaceful or easy. Today we mark the start of our war on the islands. Lord, asked another, what is our quest here? What does the Emperor want from us here? Harold smiled. Gather some of the wood we brought for burning and have made a meal fire. Our journey here will not be for little and no glory, my fighting Varangian. By the time the fire was made and the several fish they had caught while sailing that day were frying on coals, the other ships had come to ground and the parties were sent to the forest. It grew dark by that time, but in the summer of the Mediterranean, the sun's glow stayed long into the night. Any forage they could find was good, but what was really needed was lumber. The ubiquitous axes among the Norse and few Greeks were put to work, and soon they had great beams being dragged through the sand to make for them a camp. There were guards stood at each of the ships who watched the beach long and forest line. All the provisions were recounted, as some water damage from the sailing was inevitable. But with their taking of the land, the replenishment would be swift. Now, Harold began once the work was well enough done for their first day. What are we doing here? What is it that Byzantium would have of we proud raiders, especially all we have done for him so far along the coast of Serkland? He drank. Many ate. All listened. We continue to raid. We do what we have been doing. We raid, my sailing Varangian. We make so grand a show of our strength and dominance that we are sworn into the city guard. Anything you want within the empire can be yours. The great wealth to be won in the mercenary Varangian force, yours for plunder. To keep on and raid until your death, this whole sea is yours. Or to stay in the city of Miklagard and have the nobility of a Varangian of the city. We win the wealth hereafter, the great success on the coast, and we can receive whatever prize we so choose. What is more is that we shall all be the richer for our hoard in what we take here. Aye, Send to my cousin Yaroslav, the king in Holmgard, where it is kept safe for me. Many of you also send with those shipments such a great plunder that you may each of you have a longhouse for yourselves and the family. I didn't know that the King Yaroslav was his cousin, Halfvald whispered to Inga. He isn't, Fitbjorn said back. This one is mine, Bodil said, taking a huge fish from the rack and slinging it over her shoulder. Someone make for a fire. I am ready to eat. You look like you already have eaten, Niels said. She smacked him in the face with the back of her hand. Not hard, but there. Shut it. Just because you cannot keep pace does not mean you need to show your envy. Niels laughed. I think we should have something to eat. Bodil might have all the stores dwindled before the night is done, Inga teased. Oh, leave off her. The lassie's a strong warrior and need to keep herself fed, Ragnar said. He had become their friend, fast and enjoyed drinking and fighting with them. And you watch yourself, Englishman, Bodil replied. I am a bride fit for Thor, and will not be seduced by your like. I am a Scot, in fact, Ragnar replied with horrified indignity. I'll nae have you calling me English. He spat on the ground. They came to a place between the ships and settled down with a small bundle of wood and made themselves a good place to sleep. Though the teams were in the forest collecting lumber and forage, there wouldn't be time to make the full camp before the darkness this night. Harold thence decided they would sleep on the beach and make a more permanent camp on the morrow. Though the supply, he hoped, would be collected that evening, Inga and Halfvald sat together, embraced in their amorous manner. Niels sat with a smile that most certainly concealed a story. Bodil ate, and Ragnar sat staring into the fire. Fitbjorn sat with his axe in his lap. He remembered his father, the cold of the tundra, the roar of the bear. He thought about the lights that lit the sky on those long nights that swallowed most of the day. Give me some of that fish, he said, and Bodil threw him a chunk. Even eating this reminded him of the taste of the bear. His mind wandered distantly to that place, his hand outstretched to the fight after that he was literally thrown aside. Father! He had screamed. He remembered standing to rush the fight and stab. He remembered the slippery ice beneath his leather shoes. Then there was darkness on the blood contrasted on the green blue of the bear's fur, so glowing as it reflected the light of the sky. He heard laughter all around him and looked to see that Niels had just told them all something to bring levity. None seemed to have realized that he had been 1,000 miles away. He smiled at them. What part of the land of Scots are you from? Asked Niels, his smile still firmly in place. Far to the north, an island on the coast, Ant Island Scythianach, it's called. He looked at them all with pride upon his eyes. I'll forgive your dumb foreign ears and tongues if you cannot pronounce it. The sophistications of my people's tongue is damn near impossible to grasp for any of you Norse. Until skinny enough? Said Inga. Ragnar laughed. No, not till skinny enough. He laughed more. Oh, are you so sure that you could pronounce my homeland's name? Asked Halfvald. Better yet, why not the name of Eiktherner, the great standing elk? Asked Fitbjorn. They all nodded at the challenge. Very well. Eiktherner. That was well enough. Bodil nodded. I'd say he got the word well enough. Not skinny enough. What does it do, this big elk of yours? Its antlers are the roots of many streams and rivers, in fact. Too many to enumerate and list here, but no, it is many. All flow from the top and the bottom of the great world tree Yggdrasil. Rivers flow from the top and feed the sea, while the well in the roots feeds into the fates of all who roam Midgard. And God bless ye too. May he have mercy on your heathenry and blasphemy. Bodil paused before a bite of food. Did you just pray for us? she asked, leaving the food in her hands. No need to thank me, he grinned in her face. Fuck you, she said, and the others shared in a laugh. On the morrow, they would make war on the distant Circland island called Sicily with an army of 500. They were battle-hardened and wealth-driven. For this night, though, they drank and sang together under the stars and by the lapping waves. Well, I rather enjoy that chapter. It was a lot of fun to write. A lot of fun to read, too. I mentioned a great many things, but the idea of a man all dressed in armor falling into the water must have been absolutely terrifying. And I really wanted to bring that about. And also the impatient nature of Harold Sigurdsson. I love reading about Harold Sigurdsson. He was more supposed to be just a side character that acted as kind of a foil for my main, Fitzbjorn. And I ended up really, really liking his story. I read his whole saga in preparation for this book, and it was just fascinating. And you'll see this later on, but he reads a lot like a Viking Jack Sparrow. That story of the casting lots out of a bag, apparently that's also in the saga. However, the saga doesn't do any work to try and tell you that it was like him fooling the other man, but from the way it was told, it's pretty obvious what he did. Yeah. Harold Sigurdsson. Here's to that. And thank you all for listening.